I have to say, Peterson, I feel like we're kin, probably because we have the same name. First time I met you was at UNC, where you were doing your one person performance, one of your many one person performances. And I was so moved by it. I forget the name. It was the one where you go through all the biblical characters.
Oh yeah, that would be transfigurations,
Yeah,
transgressing gender
Transfigurations.
in the Bible.
Yes, so good. Yeah, it's really amazing. And so I met you there, and then later I kind of stalked you at the Creating Change conference. I don't know if you remember any of that.
I do, and I remember we talked about your writing at that time.
Yeah, I was writing a one person show myself at that time, which I long story short, crashed and burned thanks to breakdown and drug use. But
Yeah, I read
for
the memoir, which
you
is a
read the
very good memoir.
memoir. Right, moving along, nothing to see here, just a book.
Very good
Yeah.
book, though. No, it's really, I was very impressed with it. I mean, lots of people, want to tell their stories, and I think it's very therapeutic to do so. It's important to get it down. But then there are some people who are writers, and you're a writer, and your story really holds up. And it's not only a powerful story, it's beautifully and wonderfully written.
Oh, wow, thank you so much. That means a lot coming from you, because I really admire your work as well, as you know. So enough of that. I just when I started this podcast, you came to mind right away, because I was like, Peterson is somebody who has even objectively been through a shit ton of trauma and stuff and experiences, and seems to have emerged with this very spiritual, very centered way of being in the world, and you have used your creative process, or whatever, your production, to kind of move through that. And I don't know, it's really stunning. So I wanted to talk to you about that, and how you came to this place where you seem to want to live and be in the world after all you've been through.
Yeah, and I've listened to every episode of your podcast at this point. So it's been really great hearing other people's stories. And at first I thought, oh, what do I have possibly to contribute to this wonderful collection of testimony? But after you asked me, I sat down, I started journaling about it, and I love the question, why live? Because I think
Mm.
it is the question of our day, of our species right now, right? Because we are so self-destructive as a species, particularly the rich, developed part of it, corporations and governments. It's just as like, um, are we deciding to live or die as a species? It
Yes.
seems to be unclear, right?
Yes. Yeah, one of the things that I want to just point out to people is you're very invested in climate change, and your work, at least as far as I know, contemporarily, is about climate change.
Yeah, and I even do climate change comedy because that shit's funny.
Comes from a dark place.
Yeah, well, and comedy has rescued me so many times. I can give a very brief overview of my weird ass backstory, and that I spent 17 years and over $30,000 on three continents attempting and utterly failing to de-gay myself
Mm,
through conversion therapy, including 2 years at the notorious Love and Action program that ultimately shut down, thank God.
wow.
And I was trapped, in this evangelical, conservative, anti-queer, super masculine, toxic world that I had swallowed. And I think it was because very much of when I was born and raised, I was coming of age right during the AIDS crisis. And that
Hmm.
really, I lived right outside of New York City. So I saw these screaming headlines of this gay cancer, which they called it at
Yes.
first, and GRID, the gay related immune deficiency.
Yes.
So back then, right, it was like if you're gay, you're going to die. And I
Yeah.
remember, gosh, it took at least 2 weeks to get your test results back
Yes.
then. And I
Hmm.
remember, I was a teenager and I had like, now I understand, I had like barely sex that could have
Hmm.
possibly given me the infection. But back then, like they didn't even know how it was spread. It was like COVID at first, right? Like, remember how we
Yep.
like scrubbed out all of our groceries
Yeah.
because we didn't know. It was like that with AIDS. And so I lived with this
Yeah.
terror and I thought, I'm gonna die. And during those 2 weeks, I like had my funeral all planned out and
Hmm.
I was like ready. And I was like kind of like shocked and not disappointed, but like it was anticlimactic when the doctor said, it's negative. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
oh, I guess I have to live now because there's that. But
Right.
but in a way, like going through all of that was like a long-term psychological suicide because being part of that world meant suppressing not just my sexual desires, but literally my entire personality, all creativity, all like love of life really was getting
Hmm.
snuffed out. And my life
Hmm.
became this drone. And I was living in New York City
Hmm.
desperately trying not to be gay in a city where it's really hard not to be gay, even if you're not
Even
gay.
if
I
you're
mean,
not
it's just
gay.
like there were so many opportunities.
So true.
Oh my gosh. I repented a lot during those days.
As one does. We must have been in New York about the same time because I was I was in New York in the early 90s and in
Okay.
the 80s and early
Yeah, I was
90s.
there 85 to 95. I was there.
Yeah, that's when I was there. That's wild. And I
Oh,
remember going to the dentist, and because I was at that time an IV drug user, they surrounded me with red tape because of the threat
gosh.
of
Yeah.
HIV. Yeah, there was like a police barrier around my dentist chair.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of people don't recognize like that's like how terrifying it was. I worked for an
Yes.
ambulance company for a short time, and we had to transport an AIDS patient early on. It would have been around 85 or 84, and the entire inside of the ambulance was covered in plastic sheeting. We were in full hazmat suits, and
Mm.
we delivered this guy to the hospital into this secluded ward where I don't think a human touched him with their
Ah,
hands with their actual
Jesus.
skin for the rest of their short life because I don't think he lived much longer after that.
Oh,
But
wow.
that terrified me along with
Hmm.
the terror of hell and all of that preaching stuff. And
God.
I wish I hadn't been so susceptible to it all, but I somehow was. It was like the perfect
Hmm.
storm.
Hmm.
And I'm not dumb, but somehow I just shut down my intellect and just,
Hmm.
well, in part because they taught us that you can't even trust your own self, right? You're
Yes.
going to lead yourself astray.
Yes.
So I basically handed my brain over to my pastor at one point, who pickled it in a jar and told me what to
Hmm.
think and what to do. And
Hmm.
I became a zombie.
Yeah, I think what you got at earlier is sexuality is such a tiny word for what it means to be queer. It is your personality. It's imbued in everything we do. And so to shut down someone's sexuality is not simply to to thwart access to having sex. It's to thwart access to being creative, to being finding joy, to finding love. Yeah, it's a big deal. It is so you were in a church where they were telling you that this was you're going to hell.
Yeah, if I didn't repent, I was going to hell. But if I did repent, God could cure me. And
Mm.
if I didn't get cured, well, then it was probably my fault because I
Hmm.
didn't want it badly enough. So it became this really
Oh,
wicked
wow.
cycle, right? Because I wanted to be cured, but I wasn't getting cured. And so I kept blaming myself as opposed to questioning, well, maybe this whole endeavor is flawed to begin
Hmm.
with.
Hmm.
But that wasn't part of the equation. I was even married to a woman for
Hmm.
5 years.
Wow.
And when that really started to implode, I thought I had one of two options.
Hmm.
And that was they both were going to end in death. One was to just leave her and go off and live a crazy gay lifestyle, get
Hmm.
AIDS and die.
Jesus.
And the other was to jump in front of the subway on my way to
Wow.
work. And
Wow.
for about 2 weeks, I really I really considered that second option. And it was finally just images of my mother, my sisters, my brother, and how it would just crush them.
Hmm.
That kind of jolted me a bit. And then this weird third option came up that I didn't consider, where my wife and I were offered a position to be missionaries in Zambia. And I thought, oh, great. God's giving me a way out. Because I can't possibly be gay in Zambia. It's not even legal in that country.
Oh my God.
Yeah, as my
Oops.
pastor would say, wherever you go, there you are.
There you are. Yes. Dang. Wow. I wonder what the self-loathing was that kept you from. I mean, I know that message is like hammered at you. There must be, I don't know, the self-loathing must be just horrific.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it was a couple things. One, I was definitely a sissy before I was a
Hmm.
fag.
Okay.
And so there were these gender differences. I mean, I very much identify as male, but definitely
Hmm.
a sissy with a C,
Hmm.
sissy. And I think that that was a lot of shame. And then I was vulnerable at a time when my parents were very busy. They owned a business. So I was vulnerable. I needed, some attention for sure. And then I was sexually abused by an older cousin. And
Uh,
I understand now that didn't make me gay at all, right? I
right.
was already gay before all that happened, but it
Yeah.
definitely gave me a complicated relationship with my body and with my sexuality.
Hmm.
And that is the very thing that these churches and the conversion therapy folks took advantage of.
Wow.
And instead of giving me the help that I needed to find freedom from these burdens of shame, not my shame, but shame
Hmm.
that was imprinted on me from somebody else,
Hmm.
instead of helping me with that, they literally put extra burdens on me that made my life a living hell.
Wow. Wow. That just blows my mind. Even though it's so common, it just blows my mind, Peterson. I'm so sorry that happened to you.
Yeah, and so when I finally came to my senses and came out, for me, I wish it was like one of those like, woohoo, I'm gay, yay, party central. But it wasn't, right? Because
Hmm.
for me, it was after all these years of trying to be straight, and it was just sort of accepting like a terminal diagnosis, like you're gay, you can't do anything about it, you're just gonna have to learn how to live with it, sort of thing. And I wasn't happy about being gay because I lived with so many lies about gay people.
Uh-uh.
And so I feared them, and I suddenly had no community. Like the evangelicals didn't want me, and I was afraid of the gays. So it was
Hmm.
a lonely 2-year period. And thank goodness I met Reverend Timothy Meadows at a gay church in Memphis, Tennessee, and he gave me an assignment. It was maybe a year or two after Matthew Shepard had been killed, and
Hmm.
Matthew Shepard's mom, Judy, was coming to Memphis
Hmm.
for a big event, and the mayor of Memphis was going to be there. It was going to be the first event that a mayor of Memphis ever attended that was an LGBTQ sponsored event.
Hmm.
This minister, he just recognized something in me. I would just kind of come in and out of his church like like a little ghost. And he stopped me one day and he said, I think you seem like a creative kind of person from the little notes you've written me and all. I'd love to have you write a poem for Judy Shepard, kind of explaining what the LGBTQ plus community in Memphis is like.
Oh,
I
wow.
was like, really? I was like, I just came out like 10 minutes ago and I'm a Yankee from New York. What the hell do I know about the Memphis queer scene? So
Right.
then he gave me a list of queer people to talk to:
Oh.
Black, trans, bi, genderqueer, all kinds of
Oh my
folks.
God. That's great.
And
It's like Christmas.
it was Christmas because every interview dislodged a lie of what I believed about queer people.
Oh,
And
wow.
I had no idea how healing that would be to have these new images of queer people in my mind.
Mm.
And then I created this choreo poem, which is like a performance poem. And I basically directed people through the different parts of, all these different characters of the different types of folks in Memphis.
Hmm.
And it was so healing. And it was the beginning of my journey to use art to help me find my way out of that horrible paper bag I was trapped in for so long.
Wow. That's stunning. That is stunning. What in the meantime had happened to in Zambia or with your wife or whatever?
We don't have time for that story.
Okay,
I haven't had enough therapy for that
fair
story. No, it
enough.
was basically an imploded, and that was the implosion. I think one of two things could have happened, right? Like, okay, wake up and smell the queer coffee. You are gay,
Mm,
brother. Embrace it. But no, I went the other way and said, oh, homosexuality is destroying my life. And that's when I enrolled in the residential program, Love in Action, and lived
oh,
there for 2 years. And after I came out, one of the first plays I wrote is Doing Time in the Homo Nomo Halfway House, which is a comic expose of that tragedy. And
mhm,
that's when I learned I could use comedy not to make light of difficult situations, but to shed light on it. And that has become the pattern of how I take on heavy issues in my life, my mom's death of cancer, even the
mhm,
sexual abuse as a child, climate change, using comedy to try to get to the heart of it for myself and for my audiences.
mhm. And you're quite good at that, I must say. So, did you write that immediately coming out of that center?
No, at first I like just started telling people my experiences. I started meeting people who were
Hmm.
affirming, like a
Hmm.
therapist and friends. And I was so surprised at the shock on their face because you live in a reality for so long, you just think it's everyday life. So I would
Hmm.
just casually say, yeah, I spent 17 years trying to be straight. And they'd be, what? You did what? This
Right.
exists? I was like, yeah, right. Doesn't everyone know this? And
Hmm.
no, not everyone knew it. And the people who did, they just thought it was a silly joke, like, "Ah, how stupid. Why would somebody do that?"
Yeah.
And I realized, there's misinformation out there. People need to know this is happening, and people need to know it's dangerous. And that
Yes.
became the hallmark of the message was, I survived the ex-gay movement, and
Hmm.
I am a survivor. And using that language, I connected with other people who felt the same way. And by 2009, we launched the ex-gay survivor movement. I'm sorry, 2007 it was. We launched the ex-gay survivor movement. And through that, we began to bear witness to the harm we experience. And it was just at that beginning stage of like YouTube and social media where people were really paying attention to that. And
Hmm.
we were able, just a handful of us with some activists, we were able to change the public discourse so that now, if you mention conversion therapy, almost everyone knows, oh, that stuff's bad. That's really dangerous.
Right. Right. That's right. It's so funny, there is this sense in which the rest of humanity has that this is sort of an outside issue, like that doesn't really happen or it can't happen to me. Or, and I think it's really important to tell these stories. It's like, the last interview I did with my friend Philippe, who we were in a cult, a religious cult together, right? And that sort of event is so much more common than you'd ever think about. It's like you could throw a stone and hit a cult. Seriously, it's happening next door. Like it's just really prevalent. And I think same with this sort of exploitation of gay shame and gay guilt, that or queer shame that there are exploiters everywhere and it's happening all the time.
Yeah, and now it has definitely jumped to target more trans and non-binary people.
Yeah.
And I fear for, well, two things: parents who are ill-informed or scared or
Hmm.
bigoted, or I think it's always a whole cocktail of reasons
Yes.
where they will want their child to be cured through a
Hmm.
therapist or something. And I feel that more information needs to be out there about the harms of these kind of treatments, particularly for young people.
Hmm.
And cisgender gays and lesbians and bi folks need to stand in solid solidarity with trans and non-binary folks, because the conservatives want to peel us away and
Hmm.
to create this us and them sort of thing. And that, we need to stand together with our siblings in all of this. And if you don't understand, if it's confusing to you, educate yourself, because we are kin, and it's a long history we share.
That's that's right. Thank you for bringing that up, because there, that's another poorly understood phenomenon, that there are plenty of gay people who are anti-trans, or who do not see the trans movement as in alignment with gay and lesbian movement. And uh, but
That's
yes,
exactly why I wrote that Transfigurations play. I mean, a lot of people have
mhm,
benefited from that. People who are trans or non-binary, who are come from a faith background.
mhm.
Conservatives have found it. Cis conservative folks have found it really helpful to see the Bible in a new way. But my primary objective was to talk to my people, to preach to my choir, and say, listen, we need to understand that, we need to understand gender and even our own gender differences. And I think sometimes some of the hostility comes from unresolved gender differences in people's own lives. And they, like me,
Absolutely.
were sissies before they were fags. And as a result, they have this internalized hatred towards anything that does not conform to gender. And then it comes out in these ugly and inappropriate ways.
Yeah. And, and there is this sort of nuanced, I, this could be contentious, but I feel like there's a more of a generosity towards trans people who really conform to a strong gender identity than people who are maybe inhabiting another space, either between or beyond male and female binary. I mean, I happen to
Oh, I think you're
identify.
absolutely right. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No,
I
go
mean,
on.
what were you going to say? No, no. I
No.
think you're absolutely right. People don't want that gray area. They want a simple binary. Keep it simple.
Hmm.
But it's not simple. Like tell me more about you yourself and how you're identifying.
Well, I identify as trans male, and for me, it's in kind of a nuanced journey. I'm not one of those I'm a man trans guys. I have 47 years of female experience. I was born in a body of a woman. I don't feel like I there's a masculinity for me that is always intangible and out of reach. And this is sort of the nature of my own transness, is that there is this sort of kind of unreachable, intangible gender that I will never have. And I appreciate that other people feel fully male, fully female. That is not my experience. My experience is one of a kind of quiet longing and
Mhm.
an acceptance of where I'm at in terms of my own gender.
Mhm.
Yeah. How about you?
My dad was a U.S. Marine, and I definitely know that my
Well,
gender is different than his gender. I mean, he's just
no
he
doubt.
was like, we're both men, but we're totally different men. And I think that's the reality. Like, again, like, is there are there only two genders? Absolutely not. Even among cis people, we
Mhm.
express our gender differently. So I think that everyone gets trapped in these straitjackets, these
As it were.
cisgender straight jackets. And it's not just the queer folks, but everyone in society suffers from it. And everyone can be liberated
Mhm.
and that's why I love, like, I remember when I first came out and I went to a drag show.
Mhm.
And I had all sorts of like mixed feelings of shame and all this stuff, and
Yes.
I'm at this blah, all this stuff. Anyway, there was this moment where there was this drag queen, and she was an older drag queen. She wasn't particularly pretty, but there was this moment when she stood in front of the audience and she was like a goddess. And these
Mm.
straight women were going with their dollars and giving the dollars their tips, but there was a look on their face, like the look they would give to a deity, that there was something so I don't know, spiritual and
Hmm.
ancient about this exchange that was going on. And it
Hmm.
like became, this person became transfigured, and there was nothing grotesque. And the makeup, it didn't matter that the makeup wasn't perfect. There was something divine in that moment. And that really struck me, that I like experienced this divine moment in this very seedy gay bar with sticky floors.
As one does.
There, as one does. I
Which
think
is
her
where
name was,
transfigurations kind of came from, right? This sort of, that's what I felt like I got out of that performance, was this like divine beauty that comes from transness.
yeah, and it's a one person show, so like I really sought to embody multiple genders in one
Hmm.
body. And in the Bible there are multiple genders. I mean, there are all of these eunuchs in the Bible, which in the
Right.
ancient days they weren't considered male or female. They were, something in the middle or something altogether different. And then
Hmm.
there are these, other characters who just transcend gender. And I can't say if they're trans male or trans female. We don't know their whole story, but they
Yeah.
definitely broke out of the gender roles and the gender presentation of their day. And as a result, they became so powerful.
Hmm.
And I have to say, when I started doing climate work, I was tempted for about 10 minutes to tamp down my gayness. In Spain, they refer to gays like, is it a gay con plumas or sin plumas, with feathers or without feathers?
Oh, wow.
And I'm with
Dang.
feathers, okay? I've got
Totes.
feathers. I got my feathers. And so I
Más
thought, well,
rico.
should I kind of like just kind of, smooth them down
Or is
before
it
I
a
go into this
boa?
very, yes, this very heteronormative climate space where they're all saying, we need to do it for the children and the grandchildren. And I want to say, yeah, but I don't have any. So can you give
Right.
me another reason? But I realize I can't. I can't tone that down. One, it's not healthy. I tried it, Lord knows. But
Right.
also, that's my power. That's where my power comes from, is being myself, even my sissy self. That is
Hmm.
where my power comes from. And I'm going to go in with feathers. Thank you very much.
Con plumas.
Con plumas.
I love that. Well, it's interesting. You have still have a relationship with spirituality. Do you have a religion, like a relationship with religion still, or what's going on with that?
Yeah, I've been a member of a Quaker meeting since 2001. And
Hmm.
I'm so grateful I found the Quakers, because everything about a Quaker meeting is different from my evangelical church experience.
Hmm.
Like, there's no sermon, there's no singing, no prayers. You sit in silence, which I know would drive some people mad. But I have to say, for me, after hearing literally thousands of sermons, I thought, I don't need to hear another sermon. I
Right.
need to be quiet. I need to be still. And in that stillness, I have to say, I get so many fresh new ideas. I have to bring a notebook with me. In fact, I get so many ideas
Oh,
while I'm
wow.
sitting in. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's
Very much
awesome.
so. But also, it was been so great being among a people where they're so committed to justice. And they don't do
Hmm.
everything perfect, but they've been committed to justice for all kinds of people for a long time. And I even find
Hmm.
that like there's a there's a certain like Quaker masculinity like that I've noticed among the straight guys, that
Okay.
at first it was like setting off my gator. I'm like, what? This one's gay? This one's gay? They're all married with kids. They seem what? But it
Mm,
turns out they're just got this softness to them, a gentleness to them
mm,
that comes, I think, from sitting in that silence and being in
mhm,
a community that really reverences other people's stories. And I think
mm.
that's something that hardens men in the world. This, again, this straitjacket of having to be tough all the time.
Yeah.
And that gets dropped. So it's been a very helpful. I've been in South Africa for over 14 months, unable to go to a Quaker meeting. So I've been mostly doing that on my own, by myself in the garden. But I'm looking forward to getting back to my Quaker meeting in Pennsylvania come July.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. There's something about sitting in silence, or in my case, meditating with a group of people, that is incredibly powerful. The sitting and, sitting is powerful solo, but there's a group phenomenon that happens that is just amazing. Do you find that to be true?
Oh yeah, it's like I could only the longest I could sit by myself is 20 minutes and took me years to build up to that. But
Hmm.
somehow with a group of people, it gets a bit more energized and
Hmm.
it's easier. But I have a question for you because you are yourself very much an artist. And so for you, like where does that intersection of art and sort of soulfulness, spirituality connect for you? Or
Oh,
does it?
that's an interesting question. Well, I, consider myself to be a deeply spiritual person, but for me, it's a very personal relationship that I have with an experience. And so I think of it as an experience and a relationship. And depending on where I'm at, I've created work that I felt was in kind of prayer to this phenomenon, just kind of a reverence and awe and a thank you, gratitude. So I always feel, as a member of 12 step communities, my work is to do the next right thing. So even in my art, I'm like, what am I, what's the next right thing? And I look for guidance from that place, that stillness.
Mm.
Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, I've been doing TikTok since I came to South Africa, which is
Oh my
so
God, what
funny
are you,
because
12?
I know, right? And I don't do dances, and I'm definitely not a thirst trap, Lord knows. But when I came to South Africa, I was like, you know what? I want to kind of keep a journal of my
Hmm.
journeys here, learn some
Hmm.
languages, and just have fun. And turns
Hmm.
out that was like the correct formula to get a lot of followers
Oh, that's
and really,
awesome.
like almost 70,000.
Oh
It's
my
like
God,
unbelievable. Yeah,
Peterson.
it's crazy. No, it's insane. It's like, and they're
That's
almost all
great.
South African, and a lot of them are really conservative white Afrikaners because I'm learning isiZulu and I'm also learning Afrikaans, and they're
Oh,
just so
wow.
kind of perplexed at this gay American learning Afrikaans, speaking so openly about his gay South African husband,
Oh my
and
God.
it's so interesting because it's this audience where I feel I can be myself in lots of ways. I could be very playful, but I
Hmm.
also, I spend a lot of time thinking about being authentic because I have to say that's one thing I've noticed about TikTok. It very much rewards authenticity. It's so
Mm-hmm.
different from so many other social media platforms. And I've even seen it like
Yes.
if I professionally edited a video, no one cares.
Right.
It gets nowhere. But if I am really just rolling out of bed, sharing my heart, people
Hmm.
connect. And like I've been having these heart connections with people. So it's been an art form where I feel like I've been able to kind of flow in the spirit in that way. And every
Hmm.
day I have no
Hmm.
idea what I'm going to TikTok about. And sometimes it's social commentary, it's political commentary, it's about race and class and
Hmm.
gender and all these things. But it's really great having that. Also, the past few years, I've been doing lots of production of podcasts and not just my
Hmm.
own, but like trying to create platforms to help to provide platforms for people to tell their stories. And
Hmm.
that editing experience is a very spiritual experience for me in many ways because I'm in
Yeah.
the studio, it's just me and these voices and just trying to get to the kernel of the story and
Hmm.
trying to be faithful to their story. I
Hmm.
find that a deeply spiritual and very rewarding artistic experience.
I totally get that. I totally get that. And I love that you make this distinction between these media platforms too, because there is an artifice, like I think Instagram elevated the artificial to a new height,
Yeah.
like it was purely about being seen and looking a certain way. And TikTok is like this sort of, instant, what are you doing in the moment? Like I love that. I love that. I'm going to have to explore that. I always have a little
Yeah.
bit of fear about what the new thing is, but once I get there, I'm good.
It reminds me of blogging back in like 2003 and
Totally.
2004. And it
Uh,
was like communities formed. I mean, I
mhm.
met so many XK survivors through blogging and the
Yeah.
blogger and MySpace. We like
Hmm.
actually organized protests and things through MySpace. It was kind of
Yep.
this extraordinary. And I feel like TikTok has a lot of that. Like I almost never get, I mean, I know negative shit happens
Yeah.
everywhere in social media,
Yeah.
but it doesn't happen in my TikTok. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's very warm, it's very friendly. And when I share from my heart, like I shared a TikTok recently about how climate change, when I first became really concerned about climate change, it
Hmm.
was so hard for me because I'm not an environmentalist. I mean, I
Hmm.
like clean air, but it's like not my jam. And so it was like this new thing. And the feeling I had reminded me of when my mom was diagnosed with cancer.
Mm.
And the feeling of like, how could this be? She's too big
Mm.
to fail. Like the world can't exist without her in it. And that's how I felt about when I realized how severe climate change was. And then I also remembered like during that time with my mom's illness, how my sisters and I, my brother, my dad, we found these like strengths inside of us and new
Mhm.
abilities to cope in ways that we didn't knew we were able to do. And that
Yeah.
gave me courage to face climate change. And I shared that story, and so many people then shared their hearts about their own losses, and it became
Hmm.
this really wonderful dialogue with each other about the people we love and lost and how we found courage to go on.
Right. Yeah. There. I love that with that phenomenon when that happens. I so kind of rolling back a little. People might be curious as to how you remain a spiritual person after you had been beaten, you know, abused by a religious institution for so long. Like how did that happen for you?
Yeah, and it was actually the same with going to a therapist because I was abused by forms of therapy for so long that
Oh
both
God,
the first times I
Peterson.
started, goodness, the first times I approached a therapist and the first time I approached any sort of religion institution, I was so skittish. I
Mhm.
was so hard on my first 12 therapists. I kept firing them because if they said
uh,
anything that I felt is just like, I just was so afraid. And in
yeah.
my Quaker meeting, I was like almost 2 years that I would just go when the meeting started and leave right before it ended because I didn't want to connect with anyone.
Mm.
And because I part of me knew I needed a spiritual outlet. It didn't
Mhm.
have to be an evangelical church. It didn't even have to be Christian, but there was part of me that was wired for being with God. And
Yeah.
to snip that would be like snipping the gay thing or the queer thing.
Hmm.
It's part of me.
Yeah.
But that didn't mean I trusted those people
Yeah.
with my tender little heart. And it was, I think so much healing comes through building relationships and healthy
Hmm.
relationships.
Hmm.
And fortunately, I was in a Quaker meeting in Hartford, Connecticut with really wise, deep, loving people who were just gentle with me and just, were trustworthy and proved themselves trustworthy over time. So that over time, seeing them love and worship, it's like I was like the Grinch and my little like frozen crunched up
Little
heart got
heart.
like it got bigger and bigger.
Aw.
uh but even when I applied for membership, you write this letter to say that you want to apply for membership.
Mhm.
I put in there like, I just want you to know I am gay, I am a homosexual, I am a man who likes men, and if this is a problem with anyone in the meeting or the meeting, tell me now because I don't want to find out later. And then they sat down with me, like there's a committee that you meet with, and they're like, could
Uh-huh.
you
Oh
talk about
wow.
this? Because this is very intense. You're very welcome here. In fact, our meeting was one of the first ones in the country to have a minute to endorse LGBTQ marriage, but tell us more. And they were curious about my story
Uh-huh.
and they didn't have all the answers. They were just listening. And that was
Hmm.
healing. So it's very
Mm.
much these healthy relationships can be quite healing. And just like I met all those queer people in Memphis, every story began to undo a lie and a fear.
Hmm. How did you find the Quaker Church?
It was so funny because Quakers don't evangelize much, but
No.
I had just moved from Memphis to Hartford, Connecticut. It was August 2001. And only a few weeks later was 9/11.
Mm,
And suddenly, like it was like this moment where everything stopped.
mhm,
And I was living in a new community and I just felt like I needed to be with people. I needed to go to a church or something. And I remembered an aside a woman said at the school where I was working that she was a Quaker. So I asked her, like, are you a Quaker? What does this mean? What happens? Where does it meet? And she told me, and I just showed up that first Sunday after 9/11. And it was, since I had never been to a Quaker meeting before,
mhm.
I sat down and I just like was waiting for something to start. And part of me thought like, uh-oh, someone forgot to start. And then I was like 20 minutes and it's like, oh no, this is it. Okay, this is starting.
Right. That's hilarious.
But I think if I hadn't overheard her say she was a Quaker, I don't think I would have asked because,
Mm,
like, I think Quakers need to be more vocal about their faith personally.
mhm. And not just about their oats.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, no, I think the Quaker movement is just tremendous. I just wonder how, like, you must have been so torn up going through all that ex-gay stuff. Like, did you ever become suicidal? Did you, like, how was that for you?
Yeah, there was a good period of time where I really was not sure I wanted to live. And
Hmm.
I wasn't, I think I was passively suicidal because I wasn't
Hmm.
going to be active about taking my life.
Yeah.
But I put myself in harm's way multiple times. And then there was a moment when I really was in harm's way
Yeah.
and I could have died. And I
Are you
tell it in a
referring to
story
being held up?
held up at gunpoint. Yeah, which I
Yeah.
tell in a story in the first episode of Bubble and Squeak.
Hmm.
And
Which we're going to post at
something,
the end of this, by the way.
yeah, and it was just this moment where I suddenly realized, oh yeah, I want to live.
Hmm.
I absolutely want to live. And I didn't know. I really honestly did not know
Hmm.
until I had that moment when it
Hmm.
was a life or death choice. And based on my reactions to this mugging at gunpoint, I knew I could live or die. And I
Yeah.
definitely made the choice to live to the point where I made the mugger uncomfortable because a calmness came over me that was almost supernatural. But I think it's just
Uh-huh.
the relief that I want to live. And it really
Right.
freaked the snot out of the guy.
That it's a great story. We will post it at the end of this. It's so true. Yeah, it's really amazing. And I love that sense of calmness of like, okay, now I know. And there's a power in that. And that you were also kind of, I felt like a sort of like you were a little pissed at him. Like my stuff isn't good enough.
He turned down my watch. It was a
I
nice
know.
watch. It's like, come on, man.
Jesus. Yeah. Right. So you do want to live. You've got all this trauma. Like how have you how have you lived with that? How have you
Well,
accommodated that?
yeah, well, for one, there's nothing like good therapy. And I recommend it. And if you've had bad experiences, find a better therapist or a different
Mm,
therapist. But I know that art is therapeutic, but for me, art wasn't therapy. Like
mhm.
therapy was
Right,
therapy.
right.
Art was definitely helpful and therapeutic.
Yeah.
Also, it was really helpful for me to have very strong, ecstatic, erotic experiences
Mm,
and a way to counter that shame. So,
mhm,
going to bathhouses, which
mhm.
seems so taboo, was really very liberating. And I would go, like, as a Christian, I would pray ahead of time and just say, all right, Jesus, I'm going to do this thing. And let's talk about it afterwards, and or come with me, or however it works, whatever. But I
Right.
was like, I'm going to do this in the light. I'm going to do this consciously, not as this little
Uh-huh.
like shameful, like I'm going to go off and be bad. I'm like, no, no, I'm going to go off and do this thing. I want to do this thing, and
Hmm.
then I'm going to see how I feel afterwards and assess.
Hmm.
And there was something about the physical intimacy, the touch without the shame, that was just so so healing. And so I think that also was really helpful. Again, good relationships, even if they
Mm.
were with strangers, there was
Hmm.
an
Hmm.
intimacy that was there.
Yeah,
And yeah,
it reminds me of when I had sex sober the first time. It was so powerful and so intense, not because the orgasm was so great, but there was an energetic connection that I hadn't allowed or hadn't been able to happen. And it was phenomenal.
yeah, I guess it is like being sober in a way, because my mind was so like filled with the toxins of shame and fear that it
Hmm.
was, it put me into an altered state. The thing I also recognize is that the trauma that I have in my life, I'll never be rid of it. And
Yeah.
like pretending to think that I'll come to this place of what I was before, like before I got really shattered and broken by abuse, and then
Hmm.
opening myself to religious abuse. Some things can't be fixed 100%. There are scars that can't fully heal. And
Hmm.
that doesn't mean that I'm incapable of functioning in the world. My husband Glenn, he knows that he can't jump up behind me and hug me. Even I
Yeah.
know it's him. I
Yeah.
know it's Glenn. In my head, I know there is no threat here,
Yeah.
but something seizes up in my body.
The body.
I would love to have that be gone. I doubt it
Hmm.
will ever be gone, but Glenn, he loves me, so he'll make accommodations, and he'll
Hmm.
he'll let me know he's coming towards me. He'll, you
Hmm.
know, eh, he'll come slower than he would normally do, and that's what we do, right? We
Right.
we make these adjustments and accommodations, and that's what we're doing on our planet. We're not going to fix climate change.
Right.
We are already in a climate changed world. We
Yes.
can keep it from getting to the point where it's unlivable, but hard times are coming. But
Hmm.
that doesn't mean we can't prepare for them. We can't have strong, resilient communities. We can't make the adaptations that we need to protect ourselves and each other. And that, I think, those lessons of trauma, I'm harnessing them to help me learn how to live other parts of life and the work that I'm doing.
That's amazing. Because I think, you know, many of us who go through traumatic events, and especially to the degree that you have, don't want to look at that really difficult stuff anymore. It's too much, and you have really made this conscious decision to step into what some might regard as a very dark place. I mean, climate change is, I would say it's the zenith of like dark places.
Yeah,
Like the
it
extermination
is.
of humanity and the destruction of the planet. That's kind of as big as you could get.
Yeah. And I think in a way that facing these other extinctions or potential extinctions
Hmm.
has helped me. I learned a lot from
Hmm.
facing those things. So this is not my first rodeo.
Hmm.
And so maybe a much bigger rodeo with much
Yeah.
fiercer bulls and such, but it's not my first rodeo. And so I think that that's something that I think a lot of young people today who went through COVID, although it was obviously incredibly difficult and more so for some than others, but because they went through that, they now have an experience that when the next hard thing comes, they can draw on the resources and the experience to say, okay, I've been through shit before. I've been through COVID. Come on.
Yeah.
You think this breakup's going to break me? I don't think so. And
Right.
I think that's how we learn, right? That's how we learn
Mm.
to be resilient. And if we protect ourselves from all the pain, then we'll never learn from it. But I have to say, there are times though I have to draw a line, and I've done so, like with conversion therapy. I did that work intensely for a number of years. And
Hmm.
then there came a point where I thought, this is time to lay this down. Stop performing homo nomo play. Stop being the person to appear in the media talking exclusively about this. Step back, make room for other people, but also move on, because I ran the risk of re-traumatizing myself after a certain point. And it's
Yes.
so important to know that, because I could have got caught up with this identity of the victim who's always telling his story.
Hmm.
And there's a place and a time for that testimony. And then
Hmm.
for me, there was a time to then move on to a different story and another experience.
Yeah, I feel that, Peterson. I totally feel that. I know I have for a long time did a lot of work in LGBTQIA, political movements. I worked for a lobby, and I did, and I was doing a lot of that work. And I do that work peripherally, but it is no longer the center of my, it's not my focus. I can't. It's just re-traumatizing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, particularly with nonprofits, they can like string you along forever and kind of guilt you into like, but we need you. You're so good at this. It's like, that's not a
Hmm.
compelling enough reason. It's time for me to move on.
Yeah.
And I need to use my resources somewhere else. And new
Hmm.
people need to step up. And I think this is the hard thing for activists to be able to say, I made my contribution. There's more work to do in this area, but I need to move on to something else. You're not abandoning the cause. You'll bring the
Right.
cause with you and you'll weave it into your new work. But there comes a time to move on, and it's better for everybody and it's better for the movement.
Amen. Amen. Yes. Yeah. People get really stuck in that rut. And I would
Yeah.
also venture to say there's exploitations of people in that movement. There's a lot of, I work in sexual assault and prevention and health, and people have been exploited for their stories for years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's terrible. So where are you at now? And tell me about Glenn and what's going on.
So we are in South Africa. He's originally from South Africa. In fact, he wrote a memoir about growing up white and gay during apartheid. It's called the Jack Bank, a memoir of a
Ooh.
South African childhood. And he was part of the early queer liberation movement as a university student. He was a draft dodger because if you were white, you were forced to basically be in the military to uphold this white supremacist system. And he's like, I can't do this.
Wow.
And he was part of the anti-apartheid struggle as a university student. He came to the States then in the 90s to study creative writing because it wasn't available in South Africa at the time.
Mm.
And we've been here because he received a Fulbright fellowship to start a creative writing program for high
Oh,
school
wow.
students. Yeah, as a bridge program to help them increase their literacy skills so they can get into college. And it was so wildly successful. It was in a township outside of Pretoria, a township called Mamelodi. And the students, their writing improved by leaps and bounds because of two things. They wrote about things that were really meaningful to them, and they had workshops with their peers. And
Mm.
so it was just so, and he wrote a huge research paper about it as well, where he
Hmm.
finished that project. We're winding that time down. And
Hmm.
since I do most of my work online through radio production, I've been able to just carry on and learn and explore the worlds here. It's been
Uh-huh.
so exciting.
That's so cool. Yeah, when you you said you were going to South Africa, I was like, what? It seems so random, but that makes sense.
It was the perfect place for a pandemic too, because for one, everyone followed the rules, like with the
Mm.
masking and everything. The infection
Really?
rate was always, no matter what you heard about South Africa, the infection rate was always much lower than anywhere in the United States. It was always
Mm.
much safer.
Hmm.
And the weather's so great, you could always meet people outdoors.
Ah.
Like you didn't have to be indoors with people.
Uh-huh.
So it was a it was such a social experience for us at a time when many people were not having social experiences.
Oh, that's wild. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
been terrible here. Like it was terrible. It was totally isolating and traumatic. And it's beautiful where you are, right?
Yeah, we live in the mountains right now in a little village called Waterfallboefen,
Hmm.
and it's along a river. We took this hike yesterday, 12 kilometers. It was, I'm all scratched up all over my body, but it was worth it because we walked down to the bottom of a waterfall, this giant waterfall, and we got to swim in the pool, and no one was there. So we
Hmm.
just stripped off all of our clothes and went skinny dipping. It was awesome.
Oh, how lovely. I
It
love
was
that.
fun.
I'm so envious. So, Peterson, I don't usually ask this so directly, but I'm going to. Why live?
Why live? I mean, partly, Well, I think I used to would say something like, well, to get back to the people who abused me. But I'm like, you know what? I'm so detached from that mess right
Mm,
now. Like, I'm not
yeah,
living for them.
no.
Even, even I'm not even succeeding to kind of rub it in their faces. I feel bad for them, and I hope that they
Hmm.
get liberated too. And I think that's what liberation's all about. I think I want to live because I've got important work to do,
Hmm.
and it's so much fun to do. And God knows the climate movement needs queer people because boy, the straight people make it so boring and horrible. And so like I have like important work to do here and I'm just having a good time. I mean, I'm fortunate that I don't suffer from clinical depression, which is a real thing and
Yeah.
does require medication. And I get that.
Hmm.
I don't know if I have a compelling reason to live other than I feel life within me, burning within me. And maybe it was from all those years of living in a dungeon and
Mm.
not being able to use my brain and not being able to use my creativity. And I just feel like I have so much to live and to experience and to create. And I just feel so happy to be out of that horrible place that every day, almost every day, not every day, but most every day, it's just such a joy just to be creating shit, all kinds of crazy TikTok, podcast, wacky, serious shit. After years of being forbidden to do that, I am so happy to be able to have my brain in the right place that I could do those things.
Oh my God. And we're so glad to, Peterson. Where can people find you and how?
I Gosh, I'm in every possible social media thing you can find. Just just Google quirky queer Quaker. You'll definitely find me. Um, Queer climate change, no doubt you will find me. Transfigurations Peterson, you'll find me, or my website, PetersonToscano.com. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. You can see the fun stuff I do on TikTok.
I can't wait. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that you were able to stop by and talk with me today.
Sam, I'm just so grateful just to be able to see your face again. And I hope that I will see you. You're down south, right? Are you in North Carolina?
I'm in Durham, yeah. Well, I wish you all the best and let's stay in touch and
Yes.
lots of love to you.
You too. Thank you so much for having me on the show. And I'm just so grateful for this platform you've created. And I really enjoy listening to the show too. So keep it up.
Stay tuned and listen to Peterson's story on his own podcast, Bubble and Squeak. Is that all you've got?
Is that all you got? A true story. It was about 2002. I had been out of the closet just a very few years, moved to Hartford, Connecticut. I was out, but, well, I was out. And I was out cruising, looking for someone for sex. I'll be honest, it was for sex. And I saw this guy. I was at this spot you would pull up in your car and sit there and see people. And I saw this guy. He had a baseball cap slung over his head. You could barely see his face, but he looked grizzly handsome in a pickup truck. Through the various means we communicated, and he agreed to follow me home. I drove worried that he would chicken out. But no, he followed me all the way to my quiet street in Hartford. We climbed the stairs. I lived on the third floor. My dad once said, you wouldn't want to be drunk on these stairs. They were very windy and twisty. And opened up the door to my attic apartment. It's tiny. In fact, he was a bit surprised, and he's like, this is it? I was like, yeah. I pointed to a chair, a Barcelona chair that I had set up in the corner. He plopped down, spread his legs. I went over to him and I put my head towards his crotch and I felt him touching my head, but then I felt something hard and cold. He said, this is how it's going to work. hid a pistol at my temple. He said, I want you to take off all your clothes and then get bags and give me everything that's valuable. I have body issues on a good day. With a pistol pointed at me, it wasn't so hard to get out of my clothes, actually. And I did. And I went through the motions. I took off my clothes. I grabbed a bag. I felt bad. I didn't want to use it. It was one that my mom had given me, but I didn't want to argue with a man with a gun. So I began to put my objects in. I didn't have a lot, actually. I had a Apple laptop that was expensive. There was a Bose Wave radio. There was, that was about it. Cell phone. I had a cell phone. And I put all those things in there, and he then looked at me and says, is that all you got? I was like, well, I've got this watch. And I did. It was a sharper image watch, very clean face. And he says, no, I don't want that. And I was offended. I was like, wait a minute, this is a nice watch. I paid good money for this watch. He says, no, I don't want this watch. And I began to pull out other objects, some clothes, some Xenia designer clothes. No, I can't do anything with clothes. And the strange thing is, as this took place, I became more and more relaxed, like strangely relaxed, because there I am completely naked with a mugger, with a gun, walking around my apartment, and I got calmer and calmer. So calm, in fact, that I could tell he was getting uncomfortable with how relaxed I was, how I was bantering with him in some ways as we walked around the apartment. Finally, I had everything packed up that was valuable, and he said, okay, this is how it's going to work. Put your clothes on and walk downstairs in front of me. When you get downstairs, I want you to turn right and go to the end of the block. Do not look back. And when you come back, do not contact the police. I know where you live. So I did. I walked down the street, feeling the adrenaline, feeling angry that this guy said, like, I can't call the police. I was like, excuse me, you just stole all my stuff. You can't take everything from me. Got to the end of the block, turned around, and came back, immediately went to my landlord. It was a gay guy, and I told him exactly what happened, and I said, we need to call the police. What was strange about the whole incident was that I was so calm. And I realized I was calm because I knew I wanted to live. I knew that I needed to remain calm, or else it would be disastrous. But this surprised me because up until that point, I wasn't completely certain that I wanted to live. There was a part of me that was so tired from years of conversion therapy, from years of living in a bunker-like closet, that I wasn't quite sure I wanted to live. I wasn't going to take my life, but I fantasized about being in a situation like this and thought, well, if it happened, but it did happen, and there was no way I was going to let it destroy me. I realized at that moment that no, I don't know what my life's going to look like, but I need to get through this, whatever it takes. And that relaxed me because I wanted to live.